Welcome to Life Sketches, a Chico, California Steak webcast. I'm Melanie McLaughlin, and today we're here with Susan Leitner, a dynamic and talented woman. We're really happy to be able to meet with her today. Thank you for coming. Will you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yes, thank you. I was born in Chico, California on April the 21st, 1943. And my parents were Vida and Charles Rollins. They were born in Utah. Both of them were born in different parts of Utah, and they eventually learned to meet each other. I was born in a maternity home over on Nord Road because we didn't have a hospital in town when children had to have their be born. We were living in our West 6th Street home, and the hospital, of course, had not been built yet. Our family lived right next door to Arlie, and Arlie was our grandmother. Arlie was Rollins, but then when she came here, and you'll see why in a few minutes, she had to change her name to Hummel. And Mr. Hummel was a grand person. And he loved that house next door, the two-story house like we had. And he really utilized, with great care, building fish ponds, making fountains out of rock with water spouts coming out of the top, all around the yard. Had a great vegetable garden and so forth, and wonderful trees. And he was quite a miracle man, all the things that he did. When I was born, I had an older sister named Charlotte, and I had two older brothers, Robert and Richard. As the years advanced, my mother gave birth to three more children, three girls. I was the oldest of the three, Susan, and Annette came second 2 years later, and then Jane. She was the last child. It is now 1968. I returned home from summer school after graduating from Brigham Young University in Provo with a bachelor's degree in business education. I then started working for Butte College. And then I met the love of my life, Mike Leitner, at church one Sunday here in Chico. Mike was playing softball with the Chico First Ward team. And there was a requirement that if you weren't a member of the church, you had to go to church. And so Mike was here to attend our church. Anyway, I noticed him before the meeting was out because I was the chorister that day, and he had noticed me. I didn't talk to him that day, but when he came back the next week, he came up after sacrament meeting or Sunday school, and he said, "Can I walk you out to the sidewalk outside the door?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "How would you," Susan, that's your name, right? Yep. And he said, "How would you like to go to dinner sometime this week? I have a fun couple that are my friends, and I thought they could go with us." And I said, "That sounds like a fun time. So, yes, we can work that out." Mike and I have been married now for 52 years. Our anniversary was this past Sunday. We have 4 children: Stacy, the oldest, Michelle, Jennifer, and Mike. There is a child named after his dad. Some special interests that I have are playing the piano, organ, and decorating for holidays, birthdays at the house, watching sports, spending time with family and friends, and watching the BYU TV.
What's your favorite show on BYU TV?
Oh, Heartland. I have a lot of just favorite hour shows, but I don't, you can't watch too much TV. No, I'm kidding. Just takes up too much time, and there's too much other good things to do in life, like walks and do other things and make you healthier.
Anything else you want to tell us about your family?
Yes. My grandparents were born in Utah. My grandfather and grandmother and grandfather were born in Castlegate, Utah. Has anyone ever driven through Castlegate?
I never have.
Oh, and anyway, in 1924, they were living there in Castlegate, Utah. They had 9 children. The name of my grandpa was Orson, and the name of my grandmother was Arlie. And she was expecting another baby, number 10. Grandfather was a coal miner and worked long days for Utah Fuel Company. It was a Saturday morning, and it was a clear, brisk morning on March the 8th, 1924, when my grandfather reported to work in the number 2 mine. During that morning, there were 2 sudden, huge explosions in the number 2 mine. The dead included my grandfather and 170 other miners that had gone to work that day, plus 1 rescuer and a 15-year-old boy. I can't imagine any day more heartbreaking when I think of those miners, their widows, and their children.
So Arlie, right? 9 children and was pregnant with her 10th.
Uh-huh.
What did she do to make it?
To make it?
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't easy to make it. They had, a mining town is owned by the mine. You don't own a home. And they had a little wooden house that was down the hill. And there were only 2 bedrooms. There was no water that was plumbed in to the house. It was just a rare situation to have so many obstacles in place. And later on, over the next few weeks, Arlie did have a birth of a child, and that was a 5th boy. So now she's got 5 boys and 5 daughters. And the beautiful thing about all of this is that my father, Charles Rollins, all these years, up until when he passed away, would take the children that he had, and the younger children, older children, I should say, had gone off on getting married and enjoying family. But he took the 3 of us that were much younger. I was probably about 10 at the time. And then Annette was 8. And then there was Jane. She was probably 5. And every year, he would plan a trip to go somewhere with our family. And half of those times, it was back to Castlegate, back to family that he had known and he had worked at. And we met so many relatives. It was just mind-boggling. All the aunts and uncles and everybody that I knew and cousins that I became, as we did this over and over and over again, I had cousins that I loved to be with and that would sometimes come out here to California and spend a few time.
Did you get to see the mines where your grandfather worked?
Where I worked?
Where your grandfather worked.
Did I get to see the mines?
Mm-hmm.
Well, not the one he worked in because it blew up. But yes, I've been in mines. And it's interesting that in Castle Gate, there are so many of those mines that have the purest coal. However coal is, made by Heavenly Father, that coal in that mine is some of the purest there is. And people like to get their hands on it and use it. And there was a picture, showed Grandma Arlie and all 10 children lined. No, there wasn't the baby yet. There were 9 children. And then the baby hadn't been born yet. But that was used by newspapers throughout the United States to recognize the significance of this terrible explosion because, 6 years later, Castle Gate had another explosion and another 100 and some odd men died. And then Schofield Reservoir, that was another family in my ancestry lived up there in winter quarters, and that was another mine that had exploded in 1910 and left several hundred men dead. So it was a difficult thing to get into with a lot of risk.
Very dangerous.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very dangerous. And with that newspaper ad, they were trying to show that these miners had families that needed help. And there were donations that came in and were sent to the mining company so they could be distributed to all the people who had lost lives. After a few weeks after the mine explosion, Utah Fuel Company called my dad and his mother into their office at Castle Gate. Dad was 15 years old. They wanted to know if, they called him Lafayette, but that's his middle name. And Dad, as some of you know, if you know him well, he always went by Lafe, L-A-F-E. So Leif Rollins is what he always liked to be called. Anyway, the Utah Fuel Company knew that Lafayette was willing to stop school and be trained on how to manage the tipple. Any of you know what a tipple does? In coal mining, a tipple is a machine that is used to help get it doesn't help get the little boxcars out. But once they come out on track, because they go in on track, they're building down 3 stories into mines and putting tracks and laying them. And then all of that coal has to come out somewhere. And then it has to be recycled and sent back in these cars. And so they were trying to find somebody, especially somebody who had a mining family that would be willing to be trained as a new tipple operator. And so they asked my dad if he would quit school and not attend the grades 11 and 12. So he's already through the 10th grade. And he said he would. He was a very good student, but he said I would because I can help my mother this way. And helping her, he was helping all of his brothers and sisters as well. And then along came Herm Hummel. And my grandfather had already passed away. And Herm Hummel was a man that was an extraordinary man. He was a man that bought his big old station wagon into all the mining camps that he could get to in Utah and all the Indian reservations that he could get to and sell high-quality wool blankets. He sold a lot of them, and he made good money doing that. He also lived in Susanville, so he wasn't too far, outside of Utah. Anyway, Herm Hummel had noticed Arlie a few times with her children. And then he found out through some other source that the husband had been killed in a mine explosion. So anyway, Herm decided to get a little more friendly with Arlie. And so he spent some time visiting with her and making sure that all was going well with her. And then in the year of 1925, Herm proposed to Arlie and she said yes. Herm then returned back to Susanville and then came back with an empty station wagon because he had to be ready to take what? 10 children home and all the gear that they will want to take with them from home.
What a fantastic man.
Yeah, and Herm, yes.
Yes.
And I lived next door to him for years. Mm-hmm. It was amazing how great he was. My father kept his tipple job with Utah Fuel Company. Arlie and Herm were married before they left Castlegate, Utah. After a couple of weeks, Arlie and Herm decided to move on to Chico, California. Why? Because Herm's house was too small for all these children. He kept the house, though, and rented it out. When they moved to Chico, they purchased a lovely 2-story home on the corner of West 5th Street and Walnut Street in Chico. The mailing address was 1105 West 5th Street. And there were 2 tall pine trees that he would put right at the front gate on each side. And I have to go down there and see if they're still there. But, the house is gone, everything about the house, because vendors and businesses have bought all that property now. My parents, Leif and Vida Rollins, also met in Utah. And they eventually courted. And then they were married in the Salt Lake Temple and decided to move to California because Leif's family was already there. And they knew they had a big house. And what Leif had to do is he had to go to Chico High School and finish the 11th and 12th grade so that he could get his high school diploma. And then after that, he started going to Chico State and started to work on a degree to teach, high school students.
So that's a very interesting history of getting your parents and grandparents to this area. Mm-hmm. And your family has a strong history with the growth of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in this area, correct?
We hope so.
We've
sent a lot of missionaries out.
I think so. Will you tell us a little bit about the church in Chico, California? How did your parents and grandparents attend church when they moved here?
There wasn't a church.
So
There
what
was
did they
nothing.
do? Yeah, what did they do?
What did we do?
What did they do?
What did they do? Well, they got together, Mom and Dad, and they decided, there were several friends in this big neighborhood. And there were just a couple of Mormons in that group. And then they tried to find other Mormons. It was kind of word of mouth. And do you know so-and-so? And can we go and talk to them? And so there were a number of people. There was Alice Farron. Do you remember that lovely lady? The Farron family. Oh, Wallace and Alice Farron. They had Marilyn Howell, who had a beautiful voice and was a great pianist and organist, and that was a daughter. And then Delmer Howell was her husband, and then they had several other children. But they were a great family. And then there was one of the faces that was in that book I showed you, of one of the bishops that was first sustained here as a bishop, and that was Don Farron. And Don and Mildred Farron were another family. They lived on East First Avenue, and they invited their family and others to get to know about the church. And so there were people working at that and trying to make that happen.
So at first, they were just going to each other's homes for a sacrament meeting?
Yes.
And with just another family or maybe two families?
There were more.
Okay.
Eventually. Mm-hmm. As we found people. Mm-hmm. Surprising how many you can find if you go and look for them. Mm-hmm. And yes, we had the Wallace Farron home was used many times. That was on East 8th Street. And then the Don Farron home was used multiple times, over and over. And that was on First Avenue. And then there was another home that was used. And who was that? Oh, it's our home. Our home was used to make that happen. And then my mom was called to be a primary president, even though she had no staff. She was just called to be a primary president from somebody. And so she got the children organized and decided that they could come over to our home on a Thursday afternoon after school, and she would be, prepared to give a lesson. My sister Charlotte could play anything on the piano, so she was there ready to, help them after school. She was still in high school, but she'd get out of high school and be there in time to play some of those primary songs and help teach them. And then they would have time to go outside and play around. We had big yards. We had a quarter of a city block to roam around in. And so they had a great time. And then there were little light refreshments at the end that they could take home and enjoy. So that went on and on and on.
And those are your first memories of primary, correct?
Yes.
You were one of those primary kids.
Yeah.
So when was the first church building built in Chico?
The date?
If you don't know the date, do you remember that happening?
This is the dedication service and history of the first church building here in Chico, California. And one of the principal players in getting that beautiful property that's right off of the Esplanade was Dr. Enlow. Enlow Hospital, remember, early times hadn't been built, but it was now built. And he owned that property. And he loved hearing when the gentleman would come and talk to him about perhaps you might like to sell it to us. And he said, oh, yes, yes. Let's see if we can come together on the right price for both of us. And so they negotiated to buy that property. And then I heard, and I don't know if this is a fact, but I heard that at the end, if that church ever was to be sold or not used anymore, that it would go back to him. And that's what happened, because the church decided not to use it and built 3 other buildings in town. So when that happened, Dr. Enlow became a very significant memory and had the ability to put things together, and that promise was kept. He got that building back afterwards. And
I love hearing the backdrop of that, because my family had just moved to Chico, and a couple of years later, that building was sold. And I never knew why the church sold that building. So I love that you know the backstory of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of the issue was probably parking. I didn't think there was a difficulty of parking if one ward was coming and one ward was leaving. But once 3 wards started attending that little church building, because the chapel only held 237 people. So, that was quite significant.
And then what is this? You have a commemorative plate here.
Yes.
What is this about?
When this building was dedicated, this is the Esplanade building. It just says the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints here. And then it lets you know that on the backside it said, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was organized April 6, 1830 by Joseph Smith, a prophet of the Lord. The lot for this building was purchased April 14th, 1947. Ground was broken in November of 1950. There was a 3-year difference there. The building was completed and dedicated November the 7th, 1954. And funds were raised by donations, donated labor, and friends who wanted to donate to make this church possible. The building contains a chapel, recreation hall, and they made sure that they could handle a basketball court, because they weren't going to cheat it. And then we had a stage as well. Some early buildings didn't have a stage. And Brother Ramsden, over the years, as I remember a young girl growing up, he starred in and directed many, many wonderful productions that could have been stage hits if he had done them, as well. Because he did. Yeah. He and Jetty were a wonderful asset to this community.
That's quite a treasure you have there, that commemorative plate.
Yeah. And it came with this dedication, Service in History. And this is Sunday, November the 7th, 1954, at 7 p.m.
Do you remember being there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the message, this is Elder Clifford E. Young. He was the general authority that came for that particular service. And at that time, the ward of bishoprics was here. L. Brooks Abbott is this wonderful man here. And then Meltzer Clark, who later became a bishop. And then Brother Anderson there. So those were the ones that were presiding at that time. These were former bishops, Don Farron and Verl Patton.
From when you just met, not in the church building, but when you met at homes or in other rented buildings, right?
No, they were there in the church building. But, yeah, they were there.
So you've seen the church at its very earliest growth here in Chico, and then you've seen it as it had, I believe we had 7 wards in Chico at one point.
Yeah.
What has that been like for you, seeing such change and growth in the church?
It's amazing. It truly is. Yeah. And I love it.
Okay, so I have always associated you with music as long as I've known you. You've been a chorister, a pianist, an organist. So will you tell us a little bit about how you learned that and
Sure.
what you enjoyed about it?
Don't forget the other question, okay?
Okay.
All right. All 3 of my older brothers and sisters took piano. Richard, Robert, and Charlotte. And Charlotte, of course, for those of you who know my sister Charlotte, she's passed away now, but she was a marvelous pianist and vocalist. She sang many times as a visiting soprano soloist for the Messiah when it was done at Chico State in that big auditorium, asked to come and play that part. And she worked hard all of her life to develop her piano skills. And she also was a fine organist. She even played at other churches, that are in town that were not at the same time as our church, that she could help out. But she loved playing music. And I learned a lot from her. Really did.
Did she actually teach you how to play the piano?
No. We all took, and Charlotte took, Robert and Richard took, from a wonderful teacher named Marie Irwin, Erwin. And I, watching them was inspired to want to learn how to play piano. I think I was 10 years old when Mom decided she could afford it. But in affording it, I only paid $3.50. Now that was way back. A lesson. And that amount never changed over the years that I took piano, all the way through high school. It never changed. Now, when she had a new student, it might have changed, but not for her. But anyway, for me. But anyway, my sister Charlotte, Robert, and Richard played the piano for several years. And then they decided to give that up in terms of lessons, but then they kept playing along over the years because I would be there to do that. And we had an old upright piano, really old. And one day we changed that. So we got a nice little spinet piano for the family, and that worked out a lot better for us.
Did you take organ lessons consecutively with your piano lessons or at a later time?
A later time. So when I went to Chico State, I worked with a professor that taught organ. So I took a full year of organ there. Where do you think the organ was that I used?
I have no idea.
No idea.
Mm-mm.
When you walk into the auditorium at Chico State, there are two places that you could go, one side to the right or the left side. And there is a room on the right side that has a large organ in it. And that's where I went to learn. Full set of keyboards, beautiful registration, just everything you could want. And then as long as anybody wasn't in the auditorium singing or practicing something, we could let it out in there. And so, we had fun with that organ there. And then I had my professor who came over once a week and checked on how I was doing and so forth. Now, that's how I started to learn organ.
Do you have a preference, one over the other, piano or organ?
Well, piano's so easy to get to. An organ was cost a lot of money to buy a big organ.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're available to you at church, there's no reason why you can't go and use it and practice with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Especially if you're willing to use that talent and pay them back, the church, in terms of time on the organ and helping in a meeting. Yeah.
And you certainly did that.
Oh, yeah. All the time, many times.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite song that you like to play?
Whenever I hear the sound of a bird or look at the blue, blue sky. Do you know what that?
Yeah, I love that song.
My Heavenly Father loves me. That's one of my favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that one
And there's
too.
a lot of beautiful pieces that are hymns that are made for organ and piano.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughters and I have played lots of duets together.
That's really
always been
fun.
fun.
Yeah, that's really fun.
Yeah.
And so will you tell us, so we only have a few minutes left, but will you tell us a little bit about your time at Butte College?
I was a very lucky woman. I graduated with my bachelor's degree in business education in 1968. And in that year, there was already Butte College being built on the Pence Road. But it wasn't done yet. There was a lot of work to get done. And so what they did, Butte College did, was to rent the old Durham High School, because the Durham High School had been rebuilt, and it was just, block or two away. But what a find to have that whole high school available, all the rooms, everything, and then to have an auto shop ready to go to help the auto shop people. And then our administration, in order to run that out there in Durham, had to put in about 50 modulars, classroom modulars, to make up for the, missing numbers. But they had almost 2,000 people show up for classes on the first day, the first go-around. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you were there for the beginning of that.
Yes, because when I came down to try to find work, as my sister Charlotte had told me, go, Susan. And I did. And when I went in to talk with the Dean of Instruction, he said, Susan, we've already hired 3 new people in business education. A couple of them are local people that now will be teaching for us. And you may even know them. But we've got those 3 teachers, and we're just not willing to put another one there full time until we see if we have the need. And I said, I understand completely. And then I asked a secretary, do you know of any positions on this campus in the line of secretarial work that I could do if I can't get a teaching position? And she says, Susan, they need a faculty secretary. A faculty secretary? Yes. And then I went into the dean of instruction that was over that. And I said, have you interviewed yet for a faculty secretary? He says, no. Are you interested? Yes. And so he put my name in the hat, and I got interviewed down the road along with all the others, and I was selected. So I worked that first year in that office taking care of more than 50, 60 faculty members. And I worked with the most marvelous gentleman. His name was Maurice Martinez. And he was the campus printer. And he had brought in this huge printing press. Because he was a real professional. And could create these master copies of things, put it on the press, and have all of these tests and everything done by all of these teachers very fast. And then I had all the faculty mailboxes. Did I tell you I was hired?
You did.
Oh, no, okay. Then I had all the faculty mailboxes in there. So I put all their mail in, and then they came in and said hi every day, and then I got to know them all. You know, that was great. Yeah.
And then when did you start teaching there?
I started teaching that same semester because I went back to the dean of the night instruction. And I said, do you need any more teachers to fill up your night classes? And he says, yes. Do you teach keyboarding? I said, oh, yes, I can do that. And he says, well, let's have an interview. So he interviewed me, and I was allowed to teach a night class of adults. 40 people in a room, all doing different lessons, and everything was done by tape recorder. So the lesson was on tape, matched with the book that was being used. And then we went around, and we had criteria to follow for the grading system, and we had folders that we had to keep for all of them. And, you know, once a week they had to do official time writings because I wasn't going to, you know, grade things that they could have done on tape for 5 or 6 minutes and decided that I didn't know whether they turned the tape recorder off or didn't. So I loved it. And then eventually I ended up recording. Once that book was out of publish, then we bought another book and didn't have any tapes to go with it. So I sat in the recording studio at BYU, at BU College, and recorded all of those tapes in there over a number of days and weeks to be ready for the next go. Yeah. So
did you ended up teaching there more than being the faculty secretary, correct?
The first year I was faculty secretary, period. That was the most important thing. And then I taught that night class. Mm-hmm. But that night class didn't come ahead of being the faculty secretary. I just got lucky and could stay on at night. I was single. Mm-hmm. Stay on at night and teach that class and gather what? Experience. Mm-hmm. Doing the same class that my other friends and faculty were doing. Yeah.
And then you became full-time faculty.
Then I became the next year. Mm-hmm. They hired me full-time.
And how long did you work at BU College?
39 years.
That's a fantastic career.
Yeah. Another thing that I did, I was faculty senate president for 2 years. And that's an important job because you're administrating issues that come up all the time that you have to, work with faculty and administration on. And so I had an important job there, and I enjoyed that. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
I can't think of anything except I just love teaching. I've always enjoyed it.
You taught at church as well, in Relief Society, I think.
Yes, in
Yeah.
Relief Society. Yeah.
Yeah. You're a fantastic teacher.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and visiting with us. You have such a rich history. Your family has such a rich history. And we
Thank you.
appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Thank you.